Well, there are a lot of things that stick out in my mind from my boyhood. Things that I remember so vividly. Great things, good things, fun things, even frustrating things. And I'm sure when you think back to your childhood, there's things on your list too. And you may even had experiences where all of those emotions are wrapped up into one. Ever had anything like that? I have. And one of them is that I can remember so vividly Christmases with my grandma Ormiston. Now, I remember arriving at the house. I can still see the Christmas tree in my head with all the Christmas presents underneath. And I can remember having to wait all day to open them. We'd sit around all afternoon. And then we'd have to sit through supper. And just when I thought it was all over, it wasn't, because now it's dessert. Table had to be cleared. Dessert had to come out. Okay, it has to be close now. It has to be close now. No. Because now the dishes were dirty. And they had to clean the dishes and put all the dishes away. And I remember as a boy just going nuts with what was happening, but that's not even the worst of all. See, because Christmas only happened once a year, right? And because Christmas has to last, then my grandma had a rule that one present would be opened at a time. Now, that's not even the worst. That's not even the worst of all. The worst of all was when it was Grandma's turn to open a present. Because one would be delivered to her lap. And she would just look at it. And she would say, "Is this for me?" "Yes, Grandma. It's for you. Open the present, Grandma." "This can't possibly be for me." "Yes, Grandma. It's for you, Grandma. Open the present, Grandma." And then, no doubt of a lie, she would say this: "It just looks so pretty. I just want to look at it." "Oh, Grandma, you're with Jesus now, so I know I can't hurt your feelings. But the present was not meant to stay on your lap, Grandma. It was meant to be open, Grandma. Please rip into the present, Grandma." I can remember one person who did that with a physical gift. But I know of a lot more who do that with their faith, with things that God wants to give us. See, God is faithful. And in His time, when it's our turn, He'll give us a gift. But to fully have the benefit of that gift and know the blessing of that gift, we have to show our own. See, we need to be faithful. We need to be faithful to enjoy all these gifts that, again, in God's time, when it's our turn, He puts on our laps. We need to recognize it's a gift. We need to receive it as a gift. And we have to open the gift in the right way. Now, while that could mean a whole lot of things, and while we could talk about a whole lot of areas within that, one area where it is certainly true is in the whole area of love and marriage. Our question is this: is God really faithful in that area? Is God really faithful in that area? And we may have asked that question. Maybe even this morning there's some of us that are asking that question. Is God really faithful in that area? Well, to know that wonderful gift, when it's our turn, when it's in God's time, the question that we need to be asking is this: not, is God going to be faithful in this area, but the question is, will we be? Are we going to be faithful in this area? To recognize, receive, and open the gift in the right way. Today, in our study in Genesis, we come to a love story. The Bible has love stories. In fact, it's full of love stories. And today we come to the love story of Isaac and Rebekah. This is a love story written by a faithful God and experienced through the faithfulness of others, including Isaac and Rebekah. This is a love story written God's way. This is a love story done God's way. Now, I know what happens as soon as I talk about a love story. We have two extreme reactions. We have guys on this side and women on this side. The guys are gagging right now. Love story, The women are on the opposite end of that, whatever that is. Maybe they're getting a little bit ooey gooey. Oh, there's a love story this morning. Well, wherever you are at in that spectrum, if we're really going to learn what God has to say about this area, we're going to have to fight those two urges to do that. Guys, you're going to have to fight yours. Women, you're going to have to fight yours. We're going to have to get to the middle so we can really be encouraged and challenged by what God needs to encourage and challenge us with today. No matter where you're at in that journey, no matter where you're at, there's something for us today to be challenged and encouraged with. So with that in mind, let's stand together and let's read the first part of this text this morning, Genesis chapter 24. I'm going to read the first 9 verses. We will cover the whole chapter this morning, but I'll start by reading the first 9 verses, and then we'll probably just hit a few verses here and there as we get our way through this. Abraham was now very old, and the Lord had blessed him in every way. He said to the senior servant in his household, the one in charge of all that he had, "Put your hand under my thigh. I want you to swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I am living, but will go to my country and my own relatives and get a wife for my son Isaac." The servant asked him, "What if the woman is unwilling to come back with me to this land? Shall I then take your son back to the country you came from?" "Make sure that you do not take my son back there," Abraham said. "The Lord, the God of heaven, who brought me out of my father's household and my native land, and who spoke to me and promised me on oath, saying, 'To your offspring I will give this land,' he will send his angel before you so that you can get a wife for my son from there. If the woman is unwilling to come back with you, then you will be released from this oath of mine. Only do not take my son back there." So the servant put his hand under the thigh of his master Abraham and swore an oath to him concerning this matter. God, today as we come to your word, we're going to hear a love story today. And it's important because love done your way is important. And marriage done your way is a necessity. And so, God, I just pray for my family this morning that wherever they're at in that journey of love and marriage, that you would just encourage them today by not a love story written by man and shown on the media, on the big screen, but a real love story, one that you wrote, and one that we can see before us, lived out through faithfulness of those involved. May we be encouraged by that this morning, strengthened by that this morning, as we think about, again, wherever we're at on our own. And we pray these things, God, in your name alone. Amen. In the first 9 verses of this story this morning, we hear truth, and it's this: God is faithful to his word. God is faithful, and he's faithful to his word. The very first verse of this chapter, the very first line of this story, we hear that God has been faithful to Abraham. Look at verse 1 again. Abraham was now very old, and the Lord had blessed him in every way. See, there was promises made. There was promises made by God to Abraham, and there's constant movement towards the fulfillment of those promises. And we can see that the Lord had blessed Abraham in every way. We can see those promises are coming to fruition, that is actually happening, but actually what is going to happen is even so much more than what Abraham has seen to this point. God is going to do more. Look at the first part of verse 7. The Lord, the God of heaven, who brought me out of my father's household and my native land, and who spoke to me and promised me an oath, saying, to your offspring I will give you this land. See, God was going to do more. And the promise was that the land that Abraham was in would eventually belong to his offspring, which meant that Isaac, his son, needed a wife. That's an obvious point. As is the obvious point that the God who is faithful is going to do it. The last part of verse 7. He will send his angel before you so that you can get a wife for my son from there. God is faithful. He's faithful to his word. And it takes the personal faithfulness of others to experience that. If you want to see God's faithfulness, show your own. And we see that through a faithful father's charge. Verse 2. Abraham said to the senior servant in his household, the one in charge of all that he had, put your hand under my thigh. I want you to swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I am living, but will go to my country and my own relatives and get a wife for my son Isaac. The right one wasn't just anyone. The right one wasn't just anyone. Not any woman would do. As Abraham said, do not go to the Canaanites, this land we're in, and try to find a wife for my son from them. See, these Canaanites, they do not worship God. And they're going to cause issues and heartache for my son Isaac as he's pulled in two different directions. The right one isn't just anyone. That's important to know. The right one isn't just anyone. Right, in 2 Corinthians 6:14 in the New Testament, we hear this. Do not be yoked with an unbeliever. The right one isn't just anyone. Because what does righteousness have to do with wickedness? And what fellowship has the light with darkness? The right one isn't just anyone. It's a righteous one. It's interesting how we recognize in our world that if someone has a worldview different than somebody else's worldview, and they try to live together, those worldviews collide. Correct? Man, we see that everywhere today. These worldviews, people are trying to live with these various worldviews built on various foundations, and they all collide. And we watch that. And yet somehow some of us have fooled ourselves into believing that in a marriage, we can make it work. Can't. The right one isn't just anyone for us. The right one's a righteous one. So Abraham says, go to my family. Okay, don't stay here. I know what these people are all about. Go to my family. Well, who's going to go? Who's Abraham talking to? He's talking to a faithful servant. A faithful servant. Look at verse 2. He said to the senior servant in his household, the one in charge of all that he had. You know who the servant is that Abraham is asking this of? Someone who has proven his faithfulness time and time again. Abraham knows he's a man of faith who can be trusted. And so Abraham says, make an oath with me. Make an oath. Put your hand under my thigh. Now, what's that all about? We sometimes see that in the Old Testament, these oaths being made by someone grabbing someone's thigh. And what is happening here is that Abraham is saying in this oath, you have to follow my directions exactly how I tell you. And if you do not follow my directions exactly as I tell you, then my children will avenge your unfaithfulness. It's a pledge to faithfulness. Do it exactly like I say. And if you're unfaithful, my kids are going to avenge that. So what does the servant do? What does the faithful servant do? Verse 9. So the servant put his hand under the thigh of his master Abraham and swore an oath to him concerning this matter. This is a faithful servant. And the only way out of this oath, the only way out, is if God wasn't faithful. Look at verse 8. If the woman is unwilling to come back with you, then you will be released from this oath of mine. Only do not take my son back there. If the woman does not come back, then you will be released from this oath of mine. Abraham says that right after he says, an angel is going to go and show you who the wife is going to be. The only way out of his faithfulness is if God wasn't going to be faithful. You know what that means? He doesn't have an out. Because God is faithful, we must be faithful. And because God is faithful to his word, we got to be faithful to what he says. The right one isn't just anyone. It's a righteous one. The second chunk of this story is probably verse 10 all the way down to verse 49. I'm not going to read that, okay, but we'll highlight a few things in it in just a few moments. So after we learn that God is faithful to his word, we learn that God is faithful to his ways. And that's what this next chunk teaches us. God is faithful to his ways. He is not just faithful to what he says, but he is faithful to how he leads us. Not just to what he says, but to how he leads us. Because we know this journey of faith is in fact a journey. And we know it requires leading. And no doubt it requires leading in this whole area of love and marriage. G.K. Chesterton, the author, once said this: marriage is an adventure. It's just like going to war. Marriage is an adventure. It's just like going to war. But you know what we can do? And we can make it worse. We know there's going to be challenges in a marriage, any marriage, but we can make it worse. And we can make it worse by not allowing God to lead us to that right, righteous person. And in the servant, we see what that process might look like. We see that process in a faithful servant's commitment. Look at verse 10. Then the servant left. He left, taking with him 10 of his master's camels, loaded with all kinds of good things from his master. You know what the process requires? It requires work. We've got to step out, and we have to actually take some steps. See, action was going to be required to actually go and find this woman. Okay, steps had to be taken. Steps that included preparation for when the servant would meet this girl and meet the family of this girl, which is what the 10 camels were all about. Why does one guy need 10 camels? Because he's bringing things to this journey that will prove to that family that this girl is going to be provided for. She'll be provided for. There's going to be proof of that, and that requires work. This week, as I was doing some social media, I saw someone had posted something to my Facebook wall, and it was the 10 rules for dating your daughter. 10 rules for dating my daughter. And my daughter is a long ways away from that, whether she thinks that or not, she is. Rule number 1 was this: get a job. Get a job. Rule number 1, get a job. Well, why was that at the top of the list? Because that girl needs to be provided for. And you better have work. Right? That's on the top of the list. And this servant is going to prove this girl, whoever she is, she'll be provided for. There is work. And there's more. Look at verse 12 down to verse 13. Then he prayed, Lord, God of my master Abraham, make me successful today and show kindness to my master Abraham. See, I am standing beside this spring, and the daughters of the townspeople are coming out to draw water. Okay, there's not just work, but there's waiting. What does the servant do? He prays to God. He prays to God. He prays that God would make this successful. And then after he prays, he has to be patient. See, after prayer comes patience. But it's not this lazy kind of patience. This isn't a lazy kind of patience where we sit back and take a nap. And then we think as soon as we open our eyes, whoa, there she is. That's not what's happening here. He's waiting. He's prayed. Now he's going to be patient. But there's something he's going to do while he waits. I'm going to read 14 all the way down to verse 21. This is what he does. May it be that when I say to a young woman, please let down your jar that I may have a drink, and she says, drink, and I'll water your camels too, let her be the one you have chosen for your servant Isaac. By this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master. Before he had finished praying, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder. She was the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, who was the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor. That actually is the town he's in. We can see that in verse 10. The woman was very beautiful, a virgin. No man had ever slept with her. She went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up again. The servant hurried to meet her and said, please, give me a little water from your jar. Drink, my lord, she said, and quickly lowered the jar to her hands and gave him a drink. After she had given him a drink, she said, I'll draw water for your camels too, until they have had enough to drink. So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough, ran back to the well to draw more water, and drew enough for all his camels. Without saying a word, the man watched her closely to learn whether or not the Lord had made his journey successful. Yes, there's work and there is waiting, but there's watching. There's watching. Because the right one wasn't just going to be anyone. The servant watched Rebekah very closely to see whether or not indeed she was the one. A heartbeat wasn't enough. Just having a heartbeat wasn't enough. The servant needed to see what made her heart beat. And while verse 16 tells us that she was a very beautiful woman, obviously he could see that right away. He needed to see deeper. And what shone through in Rebekah's life was not that external beauty. It was that kindness and character, that inner quality that he could only determine by watching. That takes time. Watching someone to determine that takes time. But there are times you can see that a little bit quickly, more quickly than others. See, that's what this servant does. The servant presents a test to Rebekah. And this test is going to determine whether or not She really does have that quality that he thinks she might. And the test was a personal challenge that came with a personal choice. If you want to watch someone, you watch for those two things. There's a personal challenge and a personal choice. See, a lot can be said for someone who shows kindness to others, who chooses to show kindness to others, when that other person is someone they could very easily ignore and just walk away from. You know, like the waitress at your table, or the cashier at the grocery store. You know, she's been standing there all day. People have been complaining about the line moving too slow or whatever it is. The person on the street, the person who bumps you on the street. See, a lot can be said for someone who shows kindness to that person when most people would just walk away and ignore. You need to watch for that. And you need to watch whether or not they just do what is the most easy thing to do. And in doing that, complain and get grumpy about it, or whether or not they go over the top in that personal challenge and make the choice to do more than expected. See, what does Rebecca do? Rebecca makes the choice to show kindness to this man she's never seen before in her life. She could have easily ignored him. But she doesn't just make the choice to show kindness, she goes over the top. I mean, she goes back and forth to the well to make sure 10 camels have enough to drink. I mean, how long would that have taken? Rebecca passed the test. Okay? She made the personal choice. It was a personal challenge to her, but she still did it over the top. She passed the test because she didn't know it was one. It's easy to pass a test if you know someone's watching you. We can all play that game. You watch someone when they think no one's looking, then you'll really get a true sense as to what that person's like, as to how deep that character and beauty really is. Rebecca passed that test. Man, and if you find someone like that, hang on to them, right? If you find someone like that, you hang on to them. Because if they're going to treat strangers like that and go over the top and showing kindness to those they could easily ignore, they will treat you just fine. So there is work, there is waiting, there is watching. And finally, look at what happens after all this is said and done. Look at verse 26. Jump down to there. The man bowed down and worshiped the Lord. The man knew God was writing a story. And he gave gratitude to God alone for what had just happened. Look at verse 27. And she added, saying, Praise be to the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not abandoned his kindness and faithfulness to my master. As for me, the Lord has led me on the journey to the house of my master's relatives. God is faithful to his ways, so be faithful to how he leads. You want to see God's faithfulness? Show your own. Work. Pray and wait. Watch. See if that inner character is really there. And then you worship. You give thanks and gratitude to God no matter where you are at on that journey. If you want to see God's faithfulness in this area, you got to show your own. So what about Rebecca now? Okay, what's Rebecca going to do? She's been unaware of all this, a little bit targeted. And now she knows it's her. What's she going to do? She has a choice in this too. Women, you have a decision to make. And when you're looking for that man, you have a decision to make. And Rebecca did. And in Rebekah, we see a faithful bride's choice. A faithful bride's choice. She did have a choice to make. Now, I think that section is really the next little part, from verse 50 down to around 61 or 62. But we got to jump back to verse 28 to see really what is happening here in Rebekah. Look at verse 28. The young woman ran and told her mother's household about these things. Very, very simple little verse. The young woman ran and told her mother's household about these things. Well, what does she have to tell? What is she saying to all these people? Anybody who would listen, what is she saying? She has a God story to tell. She's telling a God story because she has seen God's hand in this situation. She knows that He is leading the events of the day, and it's not just her emotions that are on a high, and they could have been, because she was just doused with all types of gifts. Look at verse 53. Then the servant brought out gold and silver jewelry and articles of clothing and gave them to Rebekah. Man, she could have just had an emotional high. There's this guy giving all these gifts to her, just showering her with gifts. She could have had that emotional high of just being treated like she was. And it was all happening so fast. She could have just been all swept up in the speed of all these events. That can happen. That sometimes happens. There's a woman that just gets swept off her feet because a man showed up. And he knows he's being watched. And so he is doing his absolute best to give her the absolute best, show her the absolute best. In his mind, he is all her dreams come true. Right? He is all her dreams come true. But then guess what? Then she finds out who he really is and lives a nightmare. So what prevented Rebekah from living that? What stopped Rebekah from heading down that road? It was quite simple. It was a faithful witness. It wasn't just her. It was others. There was faithful witness. In verse 34, all the way down to verse 49, that servant is bearing witness to all that God just did, verifying the God story. So they're not just hearing it from Rebekah. They're hearing it from a person who's watched the events, who can conclude like Rebekah, this is God doing this, that this is a God story. Okay, God is working here. Okay, we need that. And we need a whole lot more too. In verse 50, Laban and Bethuel answered, "This is from the Lord." Look at that. This is from the Lord. We can say nothing to you, one way or the other. Here's Rebekah. Take her and go, and let her become the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has directed. Wherever you're at, if you're like Rebekah or Isaac and you're single, looking for that person, never neglect the wise, godly counsel of those people in your life who want God's best for you. Never neglect that. Because when we get love struck, sometimes we stop thinking. Ever been hit by lightning? It'd be a little bit like that. Man, you get love struck, and you get popped in the head, and you stop thinking. And your eyes begin to close, and you don't see maybe all these things you need to see. And so you need someone in your life, people who have watched, who have understood, who can verify the God story, who can say, yeah, girl, you go. Man, you go, girl. This guy is good. You will be blessed by him. Boy, you go ahead, man. She is top quality. She's the right, righteous one. You go. We need those people. And we need those who say, girl, run for your life. Do it now before it's too late. And we need people to do that in the lives of our boys too. She is not who you think you are. She is not going to be the best for you. This is not God's hand. Never neglect the faithful witness of those who've just watched, who are concerned for you and want God's best. Now, there's going to be risk. Absolutely, there's going to be risk. In fact, in verse 57, it says, then they said, let's call the young woman, Rebekah, and ask her about it. So they called Rebekah and asked her, will you go with this man? Are you going to go? And after all that had happened, all she can say is this, I will go. She didn't even know who Isaac was. Never met the man. There's some risk here. But because they do know that God is faithful to his ways, she was faithful to his leading. All those questions weren't answered, but she knew God had led. And despite the risks, she's going to walk into it knowing that God is going to be just as faithful after that step as he was before. Because God is faithful to his word. Be faithful to what he says. And God is faithful to his ways. So be faithful to how he leads you. And God is faithful to his will. Verse 62 down to the end, we learn that God is faithful to his will. When we know what God says, and we understand, how God is leading, then we begin to grasp, and we can grasp why that is so important to him. And we learn that when we finally meet Isaac. I mean, he's a big part of the story, you would think, but he only gets the last few verses. We're just introduced to this guy now. But in Isaac, we see a faithful groom's care. Isaac cared about some things. He cared about fellowship with God. That was first of all. Look at verse 63. He, that's Isaac, went out to the field one evening to meditate. Now, this isn't some New Age meditation. This is him spending time with God. This is him communing with God. Ladies, that's going to be number one on your list. It needs to be at the top of your list. Man, you find a man who communes with God, who's growing deep roots and can reflect his heart in your life. That needs to be number one. In fact, he communes with God, so much so that in verse 66, when it says, then the servant told Isaac all he had done, that's all he needs to hear to know God had been leading. He was close enough to God to know what God was up to. Man, he cared about his fellowship with God. That needs to be on the top of your list. But he cared about other things. He cared about how he treated this young lady, Rebekah. Verse 67. Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother, Sarah. Well, what's the big deal about that? It doesn't sound like much of anything. Okay, so he brought her into the tent. What's the big deal? The big deal is that Isaac didn't treat this young lady like a doormat. He didn't leave her outside to fend for herself. He didn't treat her like a doormat like so many women are treated today. He brought her in to the tent, and he kept her there because he didn't just care about fellowship with God. He didn't just care about how he treated Rebekah. He cared about God's design of how this was supposed to work. Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he married Rebekah. So she became his wife, and he loved her. and Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Isaac cared about God's design. This is God's will in this area. This is how it's supposed to work. Isaac would commit to Rebekah, heart, soul, and mind, before he took her body. I need to say that again. Isaac committed to Rebekah, heart, soul, and mind, before he took her body. You know, in our culture, we do it the other way around. Okay, it's all about the body now. It's all about how we feel, how we need to act. It's all about the actions, the expressions, the experimentation. It's all about the body. In fact, this week, I was called into the principal's office again. Sometimes, this comes up sometimes, I get called to the principal's office. I mean, as a kid, I never was. But as a parent, sometimes I get these calls because of our concerns with happening at the school. And we got a nice note home saying that the health unit was coming, talked about sexuality. And so I wrote a really nice letter to the teacher and said, here's our concerns. And then I get a call back to the principal's office. And one of our concerns is exactly that. Our concern is that it can't be all about the body first. It can't be all about how we feel, what we want to do, what makes us feel better or feel good. And that's what's happening in our culture today. It's all about the body. And then we wonder why people's minds are at chaos, and why their souls are in turmoil, and why their hearts have been broken. We got it backwards. Isaac would not do this backwards because he cared about God's design. And so Rebekah learned, because of that Isaac was exactly the man she was led to believe. All these things that were told about Isaac, she knew that's exactly who he is. They weren't just lying about him. That's exactly who Isaac is. And he built their relationship on the foundation that God had set for them. Because he knows that foundation means the gift is going to be opened properly. And there's going to be no future baggage from doing it another way. Love and marriage is a gift from God. And for some of us, when it's God's time, when he decides, and when he decides it's our turn, it's our turn now, he gives us this incredible gift. But the only way it's really going to be a wonderful gift that benefits us, that we get the blessing from, is if we show faithfulness of our own to the gift. If you want to see God's faithfulness, show your own. Because in our culture, we've taken this gift, and we've stomped on the gift. We've taken a hammer to this gift. It's like a bomb's been inside, ready to blow up. And for many people, it has. I remember a few years ago, Danielle and I were taking our family. I think we were going to British Columbia for her brother's wedding, I think. And so I don't think we had a full clan yet, but we were getting close. And we went through the airport security. And we had the wedding gift all wrapped up in a nice bag. You know, there's the tissue out. It just looked like a present, a really nice present. And so we had kids in tow. We got strollers and carriers and diaper bags, and we're going through airport security, and we got all this stuff, and it's going through the X-ray machine, and they're asking questions and looking for passports and tickets, all that stuff. We finally get through, and we gather the kids, and we pick them up, and we go, and we get to our gate, and it's like, just relax. The plane's not here yet. Let's just relax. We made it through. And then we realized Where's the gift? Where's the wedding gift? I thought you had it. No, I thought I had it. What's happening to the gift? Well, uh-oh. We just left a package at the security gate. And we thought for sure that when we went to get our package, it was going to be like in a bomb shelter with people with the whole protection on, seeing what's in this package. We thought for sure it was going to be destroyed. I mean, there's just a box left in the middle of nowhere. And we walked back to the security gate, waiting for the disaster, and it was just sitting there like no one had even seen it. It was exactly how it was meant to look. See, as much as we've seen things in our world with this whole area of love and marriage that are disastrous, it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. We don't have to see the bomb go off. We don't have to see this precious gift destroyed. But we have to recognize it's a gift. And we have to receive it as a gift. And we have to open it the right way. We'll be faithful to what God says. The right one isn't just anyone. It's a righteous one. And be faithful to how he leads. There's some work. But you watch and pray. You wait for God to move. And you worship. You give thanks to him no matter where you're at on the journey. And you be faithful to why you care about God's design. God has a design. And he set it in place. That's how the gift is enjoyed. If you want to see faithfulness, you show your own. That's true in a whole lot of areas. It is certainly true in this one. If you want to see faithfulness, you show your own. God, today we thank you. Yeah, it's good to hear a love story. It's been a while since we've been in a text where a love story came up. And so we thank you for that. And God, I know that this morning, many of these things we talked about are just going to be healthy reminders for some. You know, they are married. And they're thinking through their own marriage and how they're treating the gift. And for some, it might have just been a really healthy reminder of who they need to be in their marriage and why it's a gift and how it's important and what you've said about that. So it's been good. But God, for others, there's been challenges as we've talked through this. They've seen the gift and they recognize that it has been hammered, tossed around the room, stomped on. Some of us might even be having pain in our heart because of that. We haven't respected the gift. There hasn't been faithfulness. But God, we can step forward. We can move ahead in faith. Because we know you are faithful. You don't stop being faithful. That's not something you do. You don't take a break from that. You are faithful. So God, even if today, right now, we choose to be faithful in this area, no matter where we're at, just to continue to look to these things and what you've said, and be faithful, we know, because you promised, that your faithfulness will be evident. That could be the greatest encouragement for someone today. Just to know that if they get faithful now to this gift, then you will show yourself faithful. And you will present it, allow it to be experienced in a way that you have created. A design that's blessed and good and wonderful and brings enjoyment. And at times, like Isaac, that much needed comfort when there's things in your life that are painful. It is a wonderful gift, God, that you have given to us. May we continue to learn what it looks like and continue to step into faithfulness in this area. that we can experience all that you have for us because you are faithful. And we thank you, God, and we pray these things in your name. Amen.